Hi everyone, this is Peter, and continuing in my series of lectures on modern art. Today I want to talk a little bit, just a short introduction to the Armory Show. This was originally called the International Exhibition of Modern Art, but quickly, because of its initial location at an armory, the 69th Regiment Armory in New York City, rapidly became known as the Armory Show. It's kind of interesting when we think about that military origin of the word avant-garde to see how quickly the Armory Show took over with its military kind of aura. In any case, what I want to do in this is dig a little bit into the historical circumstances and try to lay out for listeners and viewers what was important about this and how it helped pave the way in very important respects for the later dominance of American art in the 20th century. And this was quite a rapid change. There are very few situations in the art world where a culture, an artistic visual culture, moves so quickly from relatively provincial backwater to, in essence, the headquarters of rapid change and innovation in art. So let's get started. To get a sense of where American art is at in the decades preceding the Armory Show, which occurred from February 17th to March 15th, 1913, so just over 100 years, I think it's actually quite helpful to look at the paintings, I guess, of William Merritt Chase. William Merritt Chase was a particularly important, very successful oil painter on the East Coast. He was fond of painting at various locations, especially on Long Island. And had a number of important teaching posts, patronage among relatively highly placed members of society, particularly around New York. And I think that he serves particularly well as a kind of gauge for the kind of art that was popular and seen as reputable, desirable, that sold well. I think that this painting gives a particularly good overall impression, no pun intended, of the appeal of William Merritt Chase's work. This landscape, not too far off from some of the scenes that we would likely find produced in France in the middle and end of the 19th century. Just a sort of generic title, At the Seaside, from 1892. So we're basically 20 years before the Armory Show. And it is a classic example of American Impressionism. American artists learned very quickly from the examples set by the likes of Claude Monet, etc., and painted a number of brightly colored, very gestural, open, loose brushwork scenes, typically of members of the middle and upper middle class, recreating in various locations. And so Chase's painting presents us with a, I wouldn't say saccharine or sentimental, but certainly idealized view of what the art buying public liked to see itself as. So it's far away. I mean, 1892 is a time of particularly intense change in American society, where we have the rise of the cities, the robber barons, industrialization, financial panics, striking workers. The list goes on and on of what's happening in the last decade of the 19th century. It's a time of extraordinary turmoil in the United States, but all of that is pretty much absent. We can see the very well dressed for a beach excursion members of a beach party here, enjoying a lively, breezy afternoon, probably on the shores of Long Island. You can see boats being moved along by the wind, these scudding clouds. It's just a gorgeous impressionist style landscape. There's little question that there's a a ready market for this kind of work, and there still is. I mean, there are painters working today very much in this mode, even now. And Merritt Chase's abilities as a painter are certainly not going to be questioned. But what begins to happen as we move into the beginning of the 20th century is that artists, and this is also helped by documentary photographers, artists are increasingly interested in what we might describe as the more difficult or unattractive or quote-unquote ugly sides of contemporary life, and especially urban life in city centers in New York or Chicago, places like that. So what we see emerging in New York City in particular is a group of artists that initially called themselves the Eight, who exhibited together and were pretty self-consciously opposed to this idealized understanding and depiction of American life and scenery. There probably is no more famous artist in this group, and which eventually came to be known as a derogatory term, the Ashcan School. John Sloan, in particular, is very well known for his depictions of the realities of urban life. And in this oil painting, relatively small, kind of almost in a Dutch mode, 2 by 2 feet, just under a meter each way. 6th Avenue and 30th Street shows this sort of new urbanism, elevated railroads, trolleys, an anonymous public, looking at this woman who appears to be perhaps drunk, perhaps mentally ill. It's not clear. It's a strange work in some ways, probing at the realities beneath the surface of urban life. But at the same time, also strikingly conventional, even with its loose, rough, and open brushwork. It has a kind of conventional genres type mode of presentation. It doesn't really dig deeper, I think, into the kinds of things that modern artists in Europe are beginning to consider. Those would have a lot to do with really probing social criticism or a hard inquiry into the nature of painting itself. It was focused on painting, but it could also work in architecture or sculpture. So although at the time Sloan and Robert Henry and the other members of this collective were seen as very problematic because of their unflinching depictions of the realities of urban life, as far as a comparison to contemporary European development, say 1907 and the Demoiselle of Picasso, this painting is, I won't say hopelessly behind the times, but very much not aware, at least in terms of what we see right here, of what's going on the other side of the Atlantic. Now, we shouldn't be super hard on John Sloan and his crew. They, first of all, if I'm remembering correctly, Sloan never made it to Europe. And this is a time when we don't have easy transmission of art images, and particularly not in color. Color photography doesn't exist yet. Transatlantic communication is still by cable and telegram. Telephones have barely gotten started. So the easy understanding or access to the way we could do today, literally in a nanosecond, somebody can put something on Instagram or whatever. That wasn't available to artists at the time. And so this is why the Armory Show of 1913 is so particularly important. There's just a couple of quick images related to the Armory Show, which started off in New York, then went to Chicago, and then to Boston. And we see a great deal of general public interest in this exhibition. I think it was deliberately designed, there's little question about this, deliberately designed to expose to American viewers the most current developments in European art. It's totally true that there are a number of important American artists represented here, some of whom are clearly more aware of what's going on in Europe than others. But the focus from the exhibition organizers, Walt Kuhn and Arthur Davies, was clearly to expose to as broad a public as possible the latest developments in European art. And in particular, if we're talking about 1913, particularly Fauvism and Cubism. So the scene in the upper right here is the Cubist room as it was displayed in Chicago. And then below you can see this vast interior from the 69th Regiment Armory. Just sort of like Madison Square Garden, or a giant sort of stadium full of art. The reactions to this exhibition were decidedly mixed. There's a great deal of interest on the part of the public, but there's also a great deal of condemnation. And the piece that really came under scrutiny and criticism, and we've run into him already, is that by Marcel Duchamp, the famous or infamous Nude descending a staircase. This piece in particular came in for a great deal of criticism, I think in part because it sat uneasily between two places. One of them would be kind of non-representational, almost fully abstract Cubism, and the other is the implication or insinuation of a quasi-traditional conventional art subject, that is to say, a nude. We already know from looking at Duchamp's experiments in Dadaism that his inclination to play games with the viewer's assumptions and to basically make it next to impossible to derive any satisfactory conclusion or meaning about art. This is a long-standing interest of his, and I think it's present in the Nude descending a staircase. We have, and we can do this if we want to, sort of trace out a staircase, and there is a title at the bottom in case we need any further clarification. There appears to be a kind of banister right here, and there's a kind of humanoid form working its way down in a diagonal from left down to right. But beyond that, there's very little here to satisfy an eye used to the kinds of paintings that we've looked at already, from whether it's the likes of William Merritt Chase, and this is just about as far from that as you can hope, or the work of John Sloan, which in essence I think is just a quote-unquote grittier version of William Merritt Chase. Duchamp really confounds and frustrates any expectation that we're going to have that this is going to be, actually comprehensible in any conventional mode. It's a kind of simultaneous stop motion type of thing. And this is relevant. People have made comparisons with Edward Muybridge, who has these sequential photographs of figures in motion. And it is possible that these are inspired by that. Certainly the development of cinema photography is, I think, echoed in Duchamp's image. Again, reactions to Duchamp were swift. We have critics comparing it to an explosion in a shingle factory, a staircase descending a nude, the kind of semi-funny, semi-hostile reactions to challenging art that we're familiar with, really going all the way back to Gustave Courbet, perhaps earlier. It's interesting to see a cartoon of sorts drawn by John Sloan, described here as a slight attack of third dementia, whatever that refers to, brought on by excessive study of the much talked of Cubist pictures in the International Exhibition in New York. And you can see there's a little sort of version of a nursery verse. There was a cubic man, and he walked a cubic mile, and he found a cubic sixpence upon a cubic stile. He had a cubic cat, which caught a cubic mouse, and they all lived together in a little cubic house. Sure, whatever. It's just interesting that Sloan really, I think, felt that this style of art, Cubism, was very much alien to his concerns. Robert Henry's Nude is thoroughly conventional and has next to nothing to do with the kinds of things that Duchamp is interested in. So if we look at the Armory Show, just to sum up really quickly, we can see that it sort of instigated a radical transformation of art, where the at least theoretically, new and challenging art of the Eight or Ashcan school rapidly got replaced by the radically fundamental changes wrought by Cubism and Fauvism in 1913.